Hello again, 110. In this video, I'm going to go over the study guide for exam number 4, which is on chapters 9, 11, and 12, public opinion, political parties, and interest groups. The initiative was an early progressive era innovation that allowed groups to propose laws that went over the head of the Congress or the state legislature so that the public could directly vote on them. The Plumbers were Republican supporters who triggered the Watergate scandal. They were employed by the Committee to Re-elect the President, which was a White House group that used re-election funds to pay these individuals. Some of them were ex-CIA operatives, G. Gordon Liddy, E. Howard Hunt, and they dressed up as plumbers. In reality, they were attempting to break into the Democratic National Committee headquarters in Washington, D.C., and they were going to plant listening devices in those offices. Before they could finish the job, they were caught by the security of the hotel. And as the scandal unfolded, it eventually forced the resignation of President Nixon in August of 1974. A grassroots lobbying effort involves mobilizing local residents to write their representatives to urge support. That is the old-fashioned method of doing it. Today, more and more that is done electronically. Presidents like to use the media to build support. We've talked about the idea of going public. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People successfully used to begin the end of segregated schools. We have talked about Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. That began the desegregation movement in education. Regulations on lobbyists require disclosing the contributions and to whom and where. Lobbying is the art of influencing policy through persuasion or persuading government officials. Corporations and business today, according to your textbook, and the Federal Elections Commission are overrepresented in Washington, and perhaps that explains the power of corporations in daily life today. Many groups, pluralism, and their involvement in order to prevent tyranny is the best solution, Mr. Madison said, for controlling faction, or the influence of the few or the one over the direction of government. You take in a greater variety of groups, you make it less likely that any one or the few are going to predominate over the rest. And this is interestingly juxtaposed with this previous statement, and perhaps there is a need for different groups to counter corporate influence today. The idea was a large republic is going to work well. Many interests, take them all in. Keep growing. The idea of a never-ending expansion of the United States is a powerful idea in American political history. An interest group is an organized group of individuals. The last successful third-party candidate was Ralph Nader in 2000. He garnered enough votes to get paid by government to run. And he was also able to put his name on the ballot again in 2004 because he received a high enough percentage of the popular vote. He did nowhere near as well in 2004, but he won quite a few votes in 2000. And that's usually why third parties form in American political history. There is some issue that is not being dealt with by the major parties, the Republicans or the Democrats. The Populist Party was a famous third party in the 19th century. They wanted to see a direct election of senators. They wanted to see the free coinage of silver. They wanted to see the railroads be more heavily regulated. And many of those things happened, but those planks were co-opted by the Democratic Party by the end of the 19th century, and the Populists went away. Not to mention the fact that William Jennings Bryan became the Democratic Party candidate in 1896. In the third party era, it was about economic issues and slavery. That was the beginning of the modern Republican Party and the Party of the South, the Democratic Party. Federalists and Democratic Republicans were the first party era. The Federalists died out pretty much after the end of the War of 1812, and the Democratic Republicans became National Republicans during the era of good feelings, during the era of intense nationalism that followed the War of 1812, the internal improvements, raising the tariff, supporting big business and manufacturing to get going. People were all pretty much on the same page until the Panic of 1819, when cotton prices dropped dramatically and there was a depression. And after that, sectional differences began to build in the United States. Republicans, generally speaking, are supported by upper-income Americans. The gender gap, please be familiar with this, is the phenomena statistically of women supporting the Democratic Party. One of the hats that the president wears is the leader of the political party, and it's usually the least effective hat that he wears. Party groups in Congress today make committee assignments. The majority party will be doing this in terms of picking the head of the different committees. Latinos heavily supported President Obama in 2 recent presidential elections. Increased restrictions on abortion is part of the Republican platform, and that is how they were able to splinter the New Deal coalition that represented Catholics for much of the 20th century. By 1980, they were abandoning the Democratic Party and beginning to vote more for Republican candidates, and this is a major reason why. Voter registration is the first step in getting out the vote. This is the difference between political parties and interest groups. Parties nominate candidates to win elections. That is their main function, whereas interest groups want to influence those elected representatives and persuade them to pass legislation for their interests. Primaries today are usually the way that the nomination is secured at the national level. Historically, the convention process was more important. It's just a big media event today. The ability to raise money is a big trait that parties look for when recruiting candidates. Are they appealing to the public, and can they raise money? We mentioned what political parties are trying to do. They're trying to nominate their candidates to win elections to office. The fairness doctrine is not really observed as much today with so much social media and internet possibilities. In the days of the big 3, in the days of the 3 networks, ABC, CBS, and NBC, they were required to give the opposition equal time to counter the claims of the majority party or the president in power. The Federal Communications Commission regulates media and the internet. That goes back to Gibbons versus Ogden. The federal government constitutionally controls interstate commerce. Newspapers are a media business. The print media is in serious trouble today. It is going away. Men and Republicans tend to support what went on in Iraq and Afghanistan, not so much women and Democrats. Identity politics become more and more influential in the 21st century. Race, gender, region. Conservatives favor the status quo, individual liberty, a strong military, and the idea of limited government. Liberals believe that government intervention can solve social problems. Using the tools of fiscal policy, they can help the poor, they can clean up the environment, we can expand social services, and reform the political process. And these sets of assumptions about how the world works is ideology. It can also be thought of as a Weltanschauung or a worldview. And these things are influenced by the spirit of the times that you live in. And generally speaking, in the U.S., we talk about liberals who are in favor of those things we just mentioned, and conservatives. Irregardless of ideology, most Americans tend to believe in equality of opportunity, liberty, and democracy. Depending upon how you word things after that, you're going to get different answers to those ideas. Good luck on the exam. Study this and you will have no problems.